Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Nashville Technology Council's Tech Hill Commons. We really appreciate you being here. The NTC just opened this space in May, and I think with this group we just push over 3,000 people who've been in the space just for NTC events through this space. So we really appreciate you joining us this morning. One of the things that NTC has been engaged in over the past 2 years is really engaging our members in advocacy on the issues that they've told us that matter and the issues that we know that they should care about. And what we do through that is we hold events on these important topics to help expose our members to the issue, get them educated about them, and also as a way to engage our members with policymakers as well. Each one of these AdvoTech type events is an opportunity for you to engage with the policymakers that are making the difference on the issue. So we really appreciate you joining us this morning and getting engaged on the issue on transit. A really quick show of hands. How many of you came via car this morning? How many of you came via Lyft or Uber or rideshare? Okay. How many of you took the bus? One. Super. Great. How many of you drove in a car by yourself? So the issue of transit today is an important one because of all of you. We have traffic on the road. And we're going to talk about ways that we're going to adapt in Nashville to address the growth here. And we really appreciate you getting engaged. This is going to be a discussion. We're going to have a panel discussion first, and then we're going to open up for questions. Some of you were nice enough to submit some questions, so we'll go through those at the end. I really want to thank you for joining us. The NTC is here for you. We want to be holding the programming that you're engaged and interested in. And so events like these are important ones, but if there's issues that you know you care about on behalf of the tech industry, please let us know. That's what we're here for. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our moderator this morning is Dan Hogan. He's co-founder and chairman of Medalogix, a well-known tech company in town. And really because of him, this issue got onto the NTC's radar as we began our NTC advocacy program. He mentioned that being able to hire smart people away from towns that have good public transit systems is a barrier to hiring them into Nashville. And so we want to thank him for joining us. And Dan, I'll kick it off to you to introduce our panel. Thanks so much.
Good morning. You'll forgive me as I scratch through my opener because Alex and I didn't coordinate all that well, and he just did the little cute survey I was going to do. So for that lopsided result that you saw, plus the 100 people roughly that are moving here every day and bringing their 100 vehicles, and clogging our roads, like that's what we're here to talk about today. So thank you for making the time. It's obviously a very important issue in the city. The mayor has, as everyone in this room is aware, just introduced a rather comprehensive plan to remake our transportation infrastructure top to bottom and put it on, this is going to be a punny day, you know, like the right road for the next 50 years or so. So those are the things we're here to talk about. But a couple of quick highlights. This plan that the mayor's office has drafted with the help of Steve and several others expands bus and rapid bus service, builds 19 neighborhood transit centers, introduces light rail, and enhances accessibility and safety improvements. But it also comes with a $5.4 billion commitment over 50 years, which is a lot of money. And it's our job as part of this community, the technology part of this community, to weigh in on that, to ask lots of questions of people that make these decisions and put these proposals together. So I hope that you guys will take the opportunity towards the end of the program to ask questions, especially hard questions of Steve. We've got him nailed down for an hour and a half, so please do make notes, and we will have ample time to do that. But obviously an investment of this size requires community support. So that's what we're here to do today, to enlighten ourselves, to align with the goals of the city, but also to press the city and these officials on are these decisions the right decisions for our community, and is the structure of the plan the right structure for our community as we evolve? So I'll again challenge all of you to ask those questions. Personally speaking, the transportation issue has represented itself in my daily operation of running my business on a couple of occasions. In fact, 3 different occasions I have tried to hire people from specifically the Bay Area. And on 2 of those occasions, I was unable to attract people because the comment was offered, well, I'll have to buy a car. And I had no response to that. Yeah, you're going to have to buy a car. And I was unable to recruit that talent. And so it was for that reason that I started barking, maybe is a strong statement, but certainly putting a bug in Alex's ear that this is something that the technology community needed to weigh in on. So again, thank you for taking the time. I think this is going to be an important hour and a half. And then lastly, the last thing that I'll ask you to think about as we're here is not only is it our responsibility as the technology community to weigh in on are these decisions the right decisions, but it's our responsibility to contribute thoughtful ideas, especially as they pertain to technology. How can we commit our organizations, ourselves, our businesses in the work that we do to help promote this idea of transit for the entire city and the middle part of the state? So with that, let me get to a couple of introductions. I'm going to start over here. We've got Erin Hafkenschiel from the Mayor's Office, the Director of the Office of Transportation and Sustainability, a former Fulbright scholar. That was impressive. I underlined that a lot. Has studied transportation and urban lifestyle in China. That's pretty cool. Really cool. Steve Bland, Chief Executive Officer of MTA. He's the guy, quote unquote, on the hot seat today. He comes to us from Pittsburgh, having worked in that system, and also Albany, New York. Corey Ershow, did I pronounce that correctly? I'm 2 for 2. He is the Transportation Policy Manager at Lyft. For many of you, I'm sure have the Lyft application on your phones. Lyft has been a tremendous partner to us here in the city, relocating quite a bit of your support jobs to the city a couple of years ago?
Yeah, it's our second largest office in the nation, right after headquarters in San Francisco.
So thank you for that. And then moving this direction, the Honorable Nancy VanReece, who is the district council person from District 8, which is a very pertinent Madison, Gallatin, and Dickerson Road corridor. All sorts of issues that pertain to this discussion up there. So I hope you'll have an opportunity to render a couple of opinions. And then lastly, we've got Tommy Lewis. Tommy is the Senior Vice President of Change Healthcare, has been involved in enterprise initiatives throughout his career. And we're going to throw I have some hard questions for you too. All right, good. Now, everyone, consider yourselves warned, people, okay? All right, now with that, I'm actually going to take a step back and just hand it off to Erin to kind of give us a general overview of the plan, to lay the framework, and then we'll probably go to you, Steve, to talk about a few things, like what are we already doing to make this happen? All right? Thank you, Erin.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, so is the mic, okay, good. The technology works. I love when that happens. Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Hafkenschiel with the Mayor's Office. I'm going to give just a quick overview of the plan. I'm sure a number of you have seen this already, so I will get through it quickly so that we can get to some of the more interesting questions. I'm sure you have heard the mayor speak before, and we like to joke with her that when people ask her priorities, she says, transit, transit, transit. It's a big deal for the city of Nashville. So why are we doing this? One of the biggest reasons is because Nashville is growing, and I love that Dan talked about the importance that transit plays in quality of life of attracting talent. But Nashville is already sort of a place that people know has a lot of amenities and a low affordable living relative to some of the bigger coastal cities. And so we're growing really fast. We're an attractive place for people to be. I'm sure you guys have seen these statistics before, but we're going to grow by 1 million people by 2040. And actually 750,000 of those folks are expected to come to our surrounding counties. So creating more affordable living within Davidson County is a priority for being able to manage that growth. We're the 8th fastest growing city in the country. We're the 3rd fastest in job growth. So jobs are really driving our growth. Dan mentioned that 80 people that move here a day. With the people that are born here, that's 100 people a day. And with that growth comes traffic, particularly when you are a car-oriented city. These maps are from the MPO, and the map on the left is the congestion map in 2010. The map on the right is the projected congestion in 2040, and this includes the road projects that are already included in the MPO's TIP document. So it already includes sort of some of the widening and road improvement projects. We call this the heart attack map. Uh-oh. There we go. I always like to start with how we got here. This wasn't something that the mayor sort of came up with out of thin air. We started with the National Next process, which was the update to our general plan. At that point, we knew that we were going to be growing over the next 25 years, and so we said, how do we want to grow? We want to preserve some of our rural and farmland and open space, and we want to concentrate our growth on our existing centers and along our corridors. After the National Next plan was completed, Steve and the MTA and RTA kicked off the In-Motion plan, which was really the visionary document for transit, and we really mapped those on top of each other. Let's put our transit where we want our growth to be, and our growth where our transit is. And what Mayor Barry has done is she has taken the In-Motion plan was a regional strategic plan. And so what we've said is once the Improve Act passed in April, we knew the surcharges that were available to us to do a dedicated revenue source for transportation, and we were able to match those revenues with the program for Davidson County. So that's what Let's Move Nashville is. This is the mayor announcing the initiative on October 17th. And we'll sort of jump into some of the plans. I always like to start, this is our existing bus network. A lot of credit to MTA that they do an incredible job with the resources that they have. You can see we have a lot of coverage, but it does mean low frequency. We are the 24th largest city in the U.S., but we're 62nd in bus fleet, 127 in our operating budget, and 200 in our service hours. We're one of the last cities of our size to not have a dedicated revenue source for transportation. So with this plan, with a dedicated revenue source for transportation, where we start is with big investments in bus. No matter if you have rail or BRT, your bus system is the backbone of any transit system. And the thing we're seeing across the country is that the three biggest drivers of ridership are increased frequency, so that you have buses that are coming at least every 15 minutes, extended service hours, so at least 20 hours a day, aiming to get to 24 hours a day, as well as improvements that actually mean that you're traveling faster than the car. So those are sort of the three biggest drivers of ridership. So the plan starts with the introduction of a frequent transit network as early as 2018 and 2019, which is the increased frequency and the extended service hours on 10 of our most frequent routes, and 4 new crosstown routes, which will mean a reduction in travel time of up to 80% on some of those rides. The rapid bus corridors are 4 corridors that have a lot of our ridership now. The reason we call this rapid bus, you may be familiar with the bus rapid transit term. We're not, because of some of the width constraints, this won't be dedicated lanes along the entire corridor, but we'll work with the community and the space that's available to try and get as much dedicated lane as possible. But it does include some capital infrastructure improvements that will mean the bus can travel faster than the car. So transit signal priority at the intersections, queue jumps around traffic also at the intersections. This is an example of a brand new rapid bus route in Chicago. You can see sort of the elevated platform, so there's level boarding, so you can board more people at a time. Off-board fare payment is an example of what we're trying to do, and those routes would be on Bordeaux, Dickerson, Hillsborough, and West End. This is probably what you've heard the most about, the light rail and commuter rail. The plan calls for 5 light rail lines, 4 on existing corridors, and 1 on an existing freight rail route, the Northwest Corridor. We'd be able to continue to operate freight at night and operate light rail during the day, and as well as improvements frequency and span improvements on the Music City Star. Another super important part to ridership is being able to access transit. So we lump sort of a whole lot of our improvements around access here. One of the most important things for this community is the new technology. I have a feeling we'll talk a lot about autonomous vehicles when we get into the questions. But when we think about sort of the revolution that's coming for transportation, I think it actually has less to do with autonomous vehicles and much more to do with ride-sharing apps like Lyft, so the mobility on demand, and mobility as a service, where you would be paying for your transportation the same way you pay for your sort of cable bill. You're just buying the pieces that you want. It also includes funding for 19 neighborhood transit centers. These would be places where some of the bus routes, 2 to 3 of the bus routes would interact, and you'd have car sharing, pickup, EV car sharing, parking spots, bus stops, a little coffee kiosk. These would be comfortable, safe places where you could access the transit network. We're also proposing a 1.8-mile tunnel downtown. One of the reasons why we decided to do this, I didn't have the graph in this presentation, but downtown is really booming. We currently have about 19.7 million square feet of commercial real estate in downtown, and just with the projects that are currently in the planning process, so they've already started their meetings with the planning department, there's enough projects in the pipeline to go from 19 million to 47 million in 5 to 7 years. That'll be a doubling of the number of workers that are coming downtown and a tripling of the number of residents that are downtown. Nashville's downtown has some of the narrowest streets I've ever seen in any downtown in the US. And we have a lot of special events downtown, so some of our streets are closed more than 50% of the time. And so we wanted to create a solution that really let Nashville downtown continue to move forward and continue to be the hub of activity that it is today. So it was important for us to go underground. We had some tunneling experts that were in town a couple weeks ago from WSP and HDR, which is Metro's engineering firm, and we were teasing them because they were clearly drooling over this project. They kept saying, limestone is the best rock to tunnel in, and the reason why that is because when you have hard rock like that, it's actually easier to sort of chip away at it and it keeps its structure, whereas if you have softer ground, you have to, as you're tunneling, you have to continually reinforce the tunnel. So hard rock is actually better for tunneling than softer rock. Who knew? This just sort of shows where we are. There's a lot of activity that's happening right now, but this is we're still in the beginning phases of this journey. The N-Motion plan was our strategic plan. MTA and RTA also did a feasibility assessment on some of our corridors. We're in the middle of our sort of public engagement for Let's Move Nashville. Council Lady VanReece is going to talk about the council consideration that's coming up starting today, this afternoon. Obviously, the referendum vote is on May 1st, but then we still have a lot of design and pre-design community engagement to be done along each of these corridors, so there'll be lots of opportunity for community input as this plan continues. But we can't do any of that if we don't get past May 1st. Just a quick timeline of the corridors. Like I said, the first things that would happen would be the improvements to the bus system. That would happen starting in service hours would start in the fall of 2018. The rapid bus corridors would open in 2023. The first light rail line, which is currently projected to be Gallatin, would open in 2026. The downtown tunnel in 2027, and then each of the other light rail lines a couple of years after, and the full system would be complete in 2032. This is my favorite slide. These are the surcharges that we're proposing. We were limited by the surcharges we could propose based on the Improve Act. I think that there were 6 options. One of them wasn't even eligible for Davidson County, so that really left us with 5. So we picked 4 of the 5. A half-cent sales tax surcharge that would graduate another half-cent in 2023. A quarter-cent surcharge on the hotel-motel tax, graduating to 3/8 in 2023. 20% surcharge on the rental car tax, and a 20% surcharge on the business and excise tax. Another thing that's important to keep in mind is that sales tax and property tax are really the only 2 revenue sources that are large enough to fund an initiative of this size. And we actually wouldn't need to do a referendum to do property tax, but sales tax is actually shared by our visitors, both commuters and tourists. So 47% of Davidson County's sales tax revenue comes from people that don't live in Davidson County. So sales tax is a way for us to really share it by the people that will use the system. I won't dive into this too much, but we can definitely talk about it. I'll highlight a couple of different points. Last week, the mayor announced the jobs that will be associated with this plan, which is really exciting. It'll be about 3,800 jobs per year created or maintained throughout the first 15 years. Sustainability is a big one. 85% of our smog and 37% of our greenhouse gas emissions comes from the transportation sector. So the plan includes a full conversion of our MTA bus fleet to electric buses, as well as providing more options for people to not have to drive alone in their car like we all did to get here, which will help us reduce our smog and greenhouse gas emissions. The other one I'll highlight is affordable housing, and just a sort of affordability in general. The average Davidson County resident spends $12,000 a year on transportation costs. If you can get rid of your car, you could be saving between $6,000 to $9,000 a year on transportation costs, which would really bring your cost burden down. We know that if you're moderately income in Nashville, which is $43,000 a year, we know there's a lot of people who make much less than that. You're spending 57% of your income on transportation and housing alone, which is definitely considered unaffordable. So this is an opportunity for us to really bring down those transportation costs. So cross your fingers for me first. And I'm happy to, I'll turn it over to
Before we dive into some of the other aspects of what's happening in transportation, Nancy, can I kick to you for a second and ask, what is the council's role in this?
Yeah.
And then besides the cost, what are the other considerations that you have specific to your district as well as the city as a whole?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. And on behalf of the Metropolitan Council, I appreciate your attention to this issue, both in the past and in its ongoing future. You can tell this is something that we'll be talking about 2 or 3 mayors from now. We'll still be talking about it. So as a district representative, I'm always laser focused on what's happening in District 8. There are 5 Metro Council members that are at-large members that are able, as a whole, to be able to constantly look at big picture items. But the 35 of us that represent particular districts are always focused on how does this affect my district. And that's important because we need to make sure that we're taking care of things. But as you can see with the first introduction tonight on this particular legislation, there are 25 co-sponsors. So I think it might pass. And those 25 co-sponsors conspicuously align with the corridors. So you can tell that we're all kind of very much focused on the issues. I also have spent a lot of my professional career in the tech sector, both in social media and digital marketing. And I call upon those of you who work in that sector to offer your support and expertise to be able to tell the story well. There are a lot of folks that are not quite sure about how this affects them, and we need your help to make sure that that happens. There's a lot of fun to be able to talk about light rail. It's kind of sexy, right? It's like, oh, light rail. But that's a ways out. I tell you what we really needed to talk about is what's going to be happening in the next 5 years. These bus rapid transit corridors that can continue to build and to be something that more and more of us will use will be something that we need more storytelling about. So I challenge you for that. I brought a cheat sheet, and I believe I've shared this PDF with folks so that you can be able to access it later. But just to give you the legislative timeline for the transit ordinance, it is BL 20171031, and Google's really good. If you just enter those numbers, you'll be able to pull up the actual ordinance itself. But tonight will be the first reading of the ordinance. For the most part, whenever there's the 3 readings, the first reading usually goes through on consent, so it's kind of procedural tonight to be able to get it entered into the conversation. The second reading would then typically be on the next meeting on January 2nd. At that meeting, there will be a request to defer the second reading, which is the public hearing, to January 16th. At that time, whenever it's deferred to the 16th, it allows a second reading to be delayed long enough to have an independent public hearing. And the Vice Mayor has very wisely scheduled that public hearing for January the 9th, which is an in-between Council Week opportunity. So it allows us to re-enter the Council chamber and have a public hearing specifically on this one issue to hear folks' concerns and ideas about it. That's tentatively scheduled for January 9th to begin at 6 p.m. And then again, that's anticipating the deferral to happen on the 2nd. After that happens, then because the Vice Mayor has also been very clear that public hearings are for the public. In fact, he frowns on us pontificating at public hearings. It's for the public voice to be heard. 2 days later, on January 11th, he will hold what is called a committee as a whole. When we join the Metro Council, we are assigned to specific committees. I've been on the Convention and Tourism Committee, the Health and Hospitals Committee, the Parks and Libraries Committee. We're all assigned different committees. Well, whenever a committee meeting comes together, that's when things of that topic are discussed before they get to the council chambers. Well, with this being a particular bill that requires all of us to discuss it, he's going to be holding a unique committee as a whole, which allows all 40 members to reconvene, which will happen on January the 11th, and that's tentatively scheduled to begin at 5 p.m., and we will then be able to discuss amongst ourselves our issues, concerns, and opportunities to address some of the things we may have heard about 2 days earlier at the public hearing. All that goes well. It then goes to the second reading, assuming the prior deferral, on the 16th of January. The third and final reading would be on February the 2nd, and that would be when the actual ordinance is then verified and sent to the mayor's office for signature, which I assume she will promptly sign. And that will allow the opportunity for this to get on schedule for the referendum to be voted on May the 1st. So that's the schedule for the Metro Council as it relates to this particular issue. District 8 I get a little bit of a bully pulpit here because District 8 starts just north of Trinity Lane, so it's part of North Inglewood on the Gallatin corridor, and just close to the Broadmoor area there on the Dickerson Pike corridor. So with that, I'm able to kind of, like when I tell people about what does District 8 look like, it looks like the state of Michigan, and my knuckles would be Briley Parkway, and the bottom part is Inglewood, and the top part is Madison. So the momentum of what is happening as we move forward towards that northeast corridor is of laser focus to all of us who are currently live in that area, to the businesses that are coming to the area and continue to thrive in the area. And I'm looking forward to hearing more as we have the opportunity to see how the immediate corridor work that happens on Dickerson Pike, the continued access and revitalization of what happens on Gallatin Pike, and then, of course, in the future, providing those cross bus routes on Due West, Hart, Broadmoor, so that people can get in between Gallatin and Dickerson with ease. So that's my perspective.
Cool. Thank you for that. Shifting for just a second, the statistic that you just threw out, Erin, that caught my attention was that we're the 24th largest city, and yet we're 200th in terms of service hours being offered by public transportation. So I guess, Steve, I'll start with you. What's happening now to bridge that gap? What are the other considerations that we have in terms of options available to us without this transportation plan? I guess kind of leading into the what if we don't do anything kind of question.
Well, fortunately, thank you, Dan, for that. Fortunately, Erin already put up the graphic of if we don't do anything. She refers to it as the heart attack map. I refer to it as the slide of doom. So whatever traffic you were in today is as good as it's going to get. But I think one of the other things we tend to forget is this has become a very prominent issue locally. We've tended to focus on congestion and traffic impacts, and equally important, and I know probably first in the mayor's heart, is how do we improve access to opportunity for the folks in our community who are disenfranchised or low income or what have you. And just to give you a sample of that, we recently completed, about every 5 years we do a major rider survey, recently completed one, and 18% of our riders are unbanked, so they don't have access to a credit card or a debit card. 23% are unbanked, 18% don't have access to smartphone technology. So I know, Corey, we're going to be talking about an awful lot in this audience of the tech sector, but the thing I would ask you to keep in your mind while we're doing that is there are folks who we kind of leave further and further behind as we focus on that. Talking about the hours, thanks to certainly Mayor Barry and also her predecessors, Mayor Dean before her and Mayor Purcell before him, the ranking that Erin mentioned would have been much, much lower 10 years ago. So there's actually been quite a ramp up in MTA service over that period of years. One of the reasons we rank as low as we do is because compared to other cities, we put necessarily a disproportionate share of our service resources into our Access Ride door-to-door program, which is specifically targeted toward persons with disabilities, senior citizens. And a number of years ago, Nashville made a very conscious and I think a very appropriate decision to make that a county-wide service. It's available throughout Davidson County, where federal law under the Americans with Disabilities Act only requires us to do a much smaller chunk of that service. So fortunately, and included in the mayor's plan is expansion and improvement of the Access Ride service, you know, as well as everything else. But we've increased service hours considerably over the last 10 years. We've seen that reflected in ridership increase over the last 10 or so years. And even though we've seen a bit of a dip in the last year, the common thread is services where we have improved, to Erin's point, frequency, span, and reliability. And a couple of specific examples. We did service additions in the Nolensville Pike corridor, almost right outside of our door. We've seen significant ridership increase in that corridor in the last 2 years. Charlotte, where we added the BRT light service, has seen increased ridership in that period of time. And the Music City Star, which is Nashville's one and only, quote, rapid transit system, continues to see year-over-year ridership increases. So that's some of what's going on the service end. I know we have a lot of innovation, I see Abhishek from Vanderbilt in the audience, who's been a key partner in some of our tech advancements. So there's a lot going on in that framework as well.
Well, I mean, that's a good segue into you, Corey. I mean, from a technological perspective, Nashville's not the only city that is looking to enhance its transportation infrastructure. How is Lyft partnering with cities like ours and making it easier?
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying that there's no chance you could hire me if I needed to buy a car. I've been spoiled. That seems like such a bug to me. From day one, our entire ethos has been about improving the efficiency of the transportation sector. One person to one car, it just doesn't work. It's a 20% occupancy rate. If this were a business, it would have failed pretty immediately. And so we have always viewed ourselves as friends of transit, because anything that's going to improve the options for people who don't have a car, we view ourselves as a complement to that, as a component of that, but it's one part of a whole integrated system that needs to include transit at its backbone. And so partnerships with transit agencies have been really a core function of what we have done, whether it's providing the first and last mile services that are going to be so important to a plan like this, or providing paratransit services, providing on-demand services, providing safe ride home trips. And sometimes it's just to save local transit agencies money. We just announced a formal partnership in Summit, New Jersey. Summit, New Jersey is a commuter town, a little bit higher income, with a lot of people who commute every day into New York. They have a pretty good train system there, but there are only so many ways to actually get to the train station. Namely, people are driving and parking a car there. Well, they reached capacity and they had a decision to make. Either they build another parking deck at the cost of millions of dollars of taxpayer money, or they come up with a new creative solution. And so what they're doing, they're actually subsidizing rides to and from the station during peak commute hours for people to take Lyft there. It is such a seemingly minor thing that can have huge impacts to get people more comfortable with taking the train, make them more comfortable leaving their car at
Tommy, I'm going to come to you in just 1 second to talk about hiring. But quickly, and I want to throw back to you two guys for a second. With 23% of the ridership of MTA being unbanked and 18% not having access to cell phones, that seems really prohibitive when we're trying to introduce enhanced technologies to make it easier for everybody. What part of the plan addresses that community?
Well, I think there's several pieces that affect it. And one is actually a project that's ongoing. So thanks to Mayor Barry and folks like Nancy on council who authorized in our capital budget over the last couple of years is our new fare collection system. So it's designed to be an open payment system. Give you more information, but we're scheduled to go to our board for award in January. So if I tip off too much, I'm compromising our confidentiality agreements. But if you're really interested, come to our board meeting in January to get a whole lot more detail about it. But essentially the idea is having the capability to do obviously mobile payment options, smart card options in an open format so that there is the potential, with the right agreements in place for fair sharing, for lack of a better word, to do the types of partnerships that Corey's talking about. We think equally important, because it will be an account-based system, is the opportunity for those who are unbanked to establish cash-based accounts on that system, and then the ability to use those accounts to access other mobility options, such as Lyft or taxi, or other forms of mobility on demand, or for that matter, parking, bike share, car share. Yeah, essentially being able to set it up in a prepaid format. One of the other elements, frankly, if Erin were to cover every aspect of the mayor's plan, this would be a 2-day workshop. The plan would propose to set up a mobility fund for low-income individuals to subsidize transit rides, so free fare on transit and some level of write-down on costs of other mobility trips. So the AP, and by the way, and I told Dan ahead of time, I'm the wrong person in this crowd. I am roadkill on the information superhighway. But rest assured, we do have technical people in our organization. We're also partnering very closely with Metro IT in their overall Connected Nashville framework to make sure that APIs are open. Things like our real-time information, which other providers and frankly the general public can grab, that information on where a bus is literally. And we've had conversations with folks like Corey and Lyft about helping to make those connections more seamless, in a transit system, down the road. Mobility on demand we have going on. We're working on active pilots. We've contracted with 2 firms, one called Transloc, who's more of a technology-focused provider, another called Demand Trans, who's more of a service-focused provider, to broker both technology solutions and then set up transportation brokerage so that we're able to more seamlessly use folks like Lyft, local taxi providers, frankly other entrepreneurs, potentially as a community development objective, that people can get into that line, and make it more both easy to reach for those of us who have access to the technology, the banking relationships, but frankly more accessible to those who don't.
There's no question that fair integration of transit systems is the holy grail, something that we're very interested in doing once the technology is right for it. As for the unbanked and those who have smartphones, it's definitely a big issue. But it's one that we think that we have pretty good solutions to for the time being. For starters, we take prepaid debit cards, and so to the extent that you can walk into any local pharmacy, exchange cash for a card, we'll accept that, absolutely. And so it's not really such an issue for the unbanked. There requires a little bit more work around for those without smartphones. The vast majority of those, even under the poverty line, do have a smartphone, but even for those who don't, one service that we've offered a lot through our transit partnerships is something we call concierge. And through concierge, it gives somebody the ability to call basically a central dispatch number with somebody who will order you a Lyft on the spot, right there and then. This has been something that's been wildly successful in our existing partnerships. It's actually had a lot of utility specifically for paratransit and the elderly.
Wow, I didn't know that. Okay. Tommy, as one of the representatives of the tech community here, how do you see this plan impacting our community of folks, and maybe specifically to my prior experience, where he just made it very clear we couldn't hire him because he'd have to buy a car. Now this plan opens rail. I think the tunnel opens in 10 years. The first rail opens in 9 years. How long is it going to take before I'm going to be competitive trying to pull somebody from the Bay Area or DC?
Good morning, everyone. What a great turnout. I'm happy to be with you this morning. It's no secret that Nashville has experienced explosive growth the last few years, great economic prosperity and development. But if we want to continue that prosperity and growth, it's going to be increasingly important that we're able to compete with peer cities, that we're able to have the tools to attract the type of talent to bring the workforce here. Because to be able to get a company like Phillips or Lyft or many of you in the room, we have to have a workforce. And that workforce is very interested in transit. I mean, Dan, you touched on it earlier, but nearly every conversation we have when we're trying to recruit in talent, and some of the technologies that we're recruiting for, and I know that many of you are recruiting for, like data sciences or artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, we're having to go to cities like Seattle and San Francisco, New York, Boston to recruit that experience, to recruit that skill set. And these are folks that are accustomed to having a robust transit system. Many of them, as you mentioned earlier, don't have cars. And when those candidates are sitting down and evaluating competitive offers, and then they have to factor in the cost of automobile ownership, which can run the gamut between $20,000 and $80,000, $100,000, it also changes the way they think about where they can live. If they own a car, they have to store the car, and then they have to think about where they're going to park. So it really changes the nature of the discussion. And so two seemingly apples to apples offers are no longer apples to apples if they have to think about owning a car. But then the other part of your question, Dan, around the timeline. Well, obviously, this is not going to happen as quick as we need it to happen and as quick as we want it to happen. But this is where we start. And as an old marketing guy, I really believe in the concept of accelerating perception. So if we get this approved and we start the process and we start building these things out, then we can accelerate perception and we can pitch to other companies that we're trying to recruit and bring to Nashville, to talent that we're trying to bring to Nashville, that we've started the process. So our marketing and branding is going to have to get out in front of this a bit, but this is where we start.
Not to demean that approach, but as an entrepreneur, I totally align to the fake it till you make it tactic. Couple of questions, and I guess I'll open this up.
Interject into that just a little bit about commercial development.
Yeah.
Commercial development along these corridors has already been impacted. I mean, when you look at the momentum that's been created on Gallatin Pike in particular, and even Dickerson Road and Dickerson Pike, it's based on the perception that things are coming. The one thing that I learned my first year in Metro Council, and I guess everyone kind of learns it the hard way, former council member Westerholm would attest, it takes a year for you to realize that you could have a great idea fully funded that everybody likes, and it's still 18 months from a shovel, right? So the idea of getting things started now so that the people that are going to work at these businesses, having homes in places where the transit goes and comes and goes from, the entertainment, restaurant and retail that supports those new communities because they live in places where people get on transit to come and go from, is all impacted by this discussion. One of the things that the folks up in Madison, we kind of had this nickname for ourselves now called Madtown. And so we started this hashtag, 6 minutes from Madtown. I mean, it's like downtown, six minutes from Madtown. So it's a matter of understanding that these jobs in the core, that they're going to want to live someplace still where there's a yard. They're still going to want to live someplace where there's restaurant, retail, daycare, great schools. So it's a community-wide discussion. Everything that happens, you recruit somebody here. It's not just how do I get to work, but where do I live where it's convenient to get to work. And so that's why it's all so interconnected, and why we keep having this discussion as it relates to so many different sectors. So I'm very obviously passionate about making sure that we start things now so that those shovels are moving, so that dirt is moving in time for the momentum that's already in place. But I have to tell you, the excitement for the folks coming to town, there's been a little bit, and you'd have to kind of listen with different ears. When you hear about this 100 people a day, 80 people a day, plus people getting born, I mean, sooner or later someone's going to hear that 7 to 20 babies are being born right now. So 4 or 5 years from now, we're going to have a pre-K issue as well, right? We're going to have a lot of young families looking for different types of housing. So there has to be an intuitive ear for the tech employers to understand that as this city continues to grow, the population continues to change. Also wanted to bring up Senior Ride, what's happening with the new Senior Ride program and being able to relieve some of the on-demand from MTA to be able to say that last mile, to be able to let seniors be able to get to and from. So there's a lot of happenings. We like to say anybody's the last home and the first home, they want the same thing, right? So a lot of that housing type in the commercial development on these corridors and what type of housing comes along those lines, you're going to see more and more of a Nashville community that supports millennials and octarians living together. It's going to be a really beautiful thing. So just want to mention that.
Let's shift back to the technologies for just a second. We already talked about integrated payment systems, but autonomous vehicles are on everybody's mind. They get a lot of attention, a lot of airplay. Talk a little bit about how this plan contemplates the use of not only those technologies, but the emergence of other technologies yet to be predicted or anticipated. How locked in are we once we pass this referendum to existing transportation technologies and platforms as we know them?
Erin, I thought you're a Fulbright scholar, so you're way brighter about this stuff than I am.
Well, one thing I'll say just to start, and Steve and I will answer this together. Nashville was actually one of 4 U.S. cities that was in. Oh, okay. Was actually one of 4 U.S. cities that was invited to be part of the Bloomberg Aspen Initiative on Autonomous Vehicles, and I think we were one of the few U.S. cities invited because they knew we were gearing up to do this plan, and so they wanted us to be as up to speed with the information about autonomous vehicles that were coming online. And I always have to start with saying, and the mayor says it best, 1 million people are coming to the region over the next 25 years, and whether those 1 million new cars are driven by humans or by robot cars, they still take up space on the road. Hopefully they can be filled with Lyft drivers that have 4 people in them, which would help, but still doesn't solve our problem. So when we look at building out this plan, we looked at our highest capacity corridors, and we still think that transit, whether it's bus rapid transit or light rail, is the most efficient way to move people. In a light rail car, you can move 16,000 people per hour. In a vehicle, you can move around 1,600 to 2,000 people per hour. So the math doesn't even compare in terms of the capacity of your road. We're not going to be able to widen our roads in all places, and so you have to figure out a way to use the existing road that you have. The other thing that I think, and I will turn it over to Steve at this point, is that after the referendum passes, we obviously are going to be working with the private sector and partners on building this out. And everybody's watching Nashville. This is going to be a huge opportunity for us to build a system pretty much from scratch. And absolutely we're going to be asking the top technology minds and the brightest minds to come and help us think through how to do this in the most advanced way possible. And then the other aspect of it is that when we start doing the design for these corridors, We will do a NEPA analysis, which requires us to do an alternatives analysis, which means we have to look at 3 different options. So while we think right now, today, that the best option on Gallatin is going to be light rail down the middle of the road, once we're doing the design process, we have to come up with 3 different options to test the environmental impacts on those. And so that will be another opportunity for us to say, okay, hold on, let's pause and let's check and make sure this is still the right thing for us to do. And I don't know whether you want to add to that or talk about that.
I guess a couple of things I would add. First of all, no doubt autonomous vehicles will be part of our future, whether they're individual cars or, for that matter, large capacity vehicles like trains and buses. And I know it always kind of freaks out our operators when we talk about that. I got plenty of things for a bus driver to do that don't involve driving the vehicle. So I think actually they might look forward to that. But Erin really keyed in on, if you have one person in one vehicle, whether it's you driving it, your Lyft driver driving it, or the vehicle driving itself in one spot, in our key congested corridors, which is where the what I'll call the mass transit part of the plan is focused, you will have gridlock. I mean, that's a math issue. That's not a technology issue. So I happen to be excited about the prospects for autonomous vehicles, but not as a cure-all, not as a magic bullet. And there's a famous picture. Very often Commissioner Schroer from TDOT and I are on the same panel, and he will show a very famous picture of Lower Broadway in Manhattan. He shows a picture in 1900 when it's like, where's Waldo? There's one car and everything else is horse and carriage. 1913, there's one horse and carriage, everything else is cars, and talking about the rapid deployment of technology. But what people don't talk about when they show that picture is, at the very same moment, New York started developing its subway system. And if you were to say back then, why in the world are we wasting money on a subway system in New York City when these car things are going to take over the world, which arguably they did, I don't think there's anyone in New York. They might complain about the subway. I don't think that there's anyone who wishes that it weren't built. The thing that excites me more, and that we're actually working on now, is the idea of connected vehicles. Because frankly, an autonomous vehicle without being connected just gets you, frankly, what we have now. And you read about the first autonomous shuttle being deployed in Las Vegas. Literally within an hour, it was in an accident. No fault of the autonomous vehicle. So an unsafe condition where a truck was backing up, it did what it was supposed to do. It stopped, and the truck backed into it. I've ridden on the current technology. It's very slow. It stops whenever there's trouble. When you start adding the connected vehicle piece, now all of a sudden when my car knows what your car is going to do, that's really powerful. And what's happening on that now, we're actually partnering with Metro Public Works and with TDOT on a Murfreesboro Road. TDOT's advancing an I-24 smart corridor project, which is very exciting in its own right. But essentially, in the 40 or so intersections between downtown Nashville and the Davidson County line, adaptive traffic signals. We're doing hard infrastructure changes like pedestrian improvements, improved sidewalks, improved crossings, a couple of queue jumps at intersections. But equipping 40 or so of our buses with a technology that connects our automated passenger counters and our schedule adherence system to central software through Metro IT and back out to Metro signal system. So for traffic, for transit signal priority, to say, well, if I have a bus that has a certain number of people that's behind schedule by a certain amount of time, I can trigger an early green, I can extend a green a little bit to make that trip more reliable. So I think the connected technology, while autonomous, and I know Lyft is heavily involved in this, I'm interested in Corey's perspective, is what's getting everybody's attention. Frankly, the autonomous without connected right now is just kind of a novelty. The only other thing I would add, coming back to the proportion of our hours that go to our access ride system, and Nancy touched on it as well. Frankly, the idea that somebody who can't see might have better independence, to me, is an awesome thing. So, hey, if we can trade out some of those door-to-door trips that are extraordinarily expensive for us to operate to a more affordable way, and then transfer those resources into those key congested corridors where we do need a, quote, mass transit solution, that's an exciting opportunity. but be very wary of the person who says, we don't need to do anything. Autonomous vehicles will take care of it all. Those folks worry me a little bit.
Yeah, I mostly agree. As I said before. Okay. All right. As I said before, we're a part of the wholly integrated transit system. This system doesn't work without robust transit, plain and simple. That said, I think that autonomous vehicles and the more we move to a completely shared mobility platform is going to have significant impacts, regardless of, or significant impacts over the status quo today. What's so exciting about autonomous vehicles is the ability to really achieve affordability, because right now, if you're going to substitute every single personal car trip with a rideshare trip, the price point just isn't quite there yet. But with autonomous vehicles, it really gives you the flexibility to do that. It really gives you the confidence that you're going to have a ride whenever you need it at a price that is still lower than the annual cost of car ownership today. And especially when that's combined with robust transit systems, there's just no point in having a car anymore. But fundamentally, the things that we can do today to alleviate congestion aren't that different with autonomous vehicles versus just moving completely to shared mobility. I want you to really think about downtown streets and what percentage of that availability street space is taken up by parked cars at a given time. What if those cars just didn't exist? How much traffic do you think, especially at peak times, is caused by people circulating looking for traffic? What if those cars disappeared? And this is to say nothing of the fact that shared mobility platforms like ours have the capacity to move anywhere from 5 to 10 times the number of people per vehicle while satisfying everybody's individual needs. You could just take a whole bunch of cars off the road, and that itself alleviates a whole lot of congestion. You still need robust transit. Transit will almost always be the most affordable, most reliable option, but especially as we move to autonomous vehicles, having a shared mobility platform becomes a much more viable option that will encourage people to give up their cars because there's no reason to have them anymore.
Before we move into questions really quickly, Nancy, Tom, do you guys have anything to add? Oh, you got your own. Mine's better.
Yours is better. Never ask a politician if they have anything to add. Never. Vote. Period. I mean, really. The only thing that that we can absolutely do every single time that is going to make the most impact is to vote, and to bring people out to make that happen. One of the things that my colleagues, particularly in the Madison area, we have 5 council members that represent parts of Madison, districts 7, 8, 9, 10, and 3. And the 5 of us are all in agreement that this needs to happen for the economic development of the Northeast Corridor. For Mayor Barry's bold vision to extend prosperity to the county line, this has to happen. For residential development, for commercial development, for the future of the families that live in Davidson County in the northeast section, this simply has to happen. And so getting out the vote and making sure that this is funded so that we can now at that point begin just how it's going to happen is imperative. And so I want to make sure that we don't, in an antiquated analogy, put the cart before the horse and get real excited about what's going to happen after until we get it to happen at all. So vote. That is the number one thing that you need to take away today, is to vote and get those to vote on May the 1st.
The only thing I would add is that the plan has flexibility built in. So as new technology emerges or things change, the plan can be adapted for that.
Thank you. Okay, now several of you have submitted questions, and I have those here, but I'd prefer to kick to you guys right now. If any of you have a question, please raise your hand. Alex, are you going to run with a mic or this mic?
Thank you. So this is more of a technical question, not so much on the autonomous vehicle side of things, but we're talking about really a transition here from a 20th century transportation model to a 21st and beyond century transportation model. That requires an upgrade in infrastructure, and many of us in this room would agree that Metro Nashville is kind of the epitome of an analog functioning governmental system. Where is the foundational piece of transition to digital architectures and digital infrastructures in the civic and governmental side of things precede this? Because if we don't have the appropriate foundation, we all know how that works when we try to build structures. Big question, so take it.
I wish that Keith Durbin was here, who's our director of Metro ITS, because he would definitely be able to talk a little bit about that. And I may ask Abhishek to chime in on this too. But I think we're starting to make that process. Keith is leading the Connected Nashville process, which was really the impetus of the USDOT's what was that even called? Smart Cities Challenge, thank you, which we submitted for. We weren't a finalist for, but it really created the impetus for us to think about it broadly. One thing that I would say is that, autonomous vehicles today are very different than they were in the past. When they were being piloted in the San Francisco Bay Area back in the 80s and 90s, you had to line magnets along the highways so that the cars would know where to go. And now so much of the infrastructure is actually on the cars. So we don't have to invest as much in our roads as we would have. We do have to make sure that we've got fiber along all of our corridors, which Keith has a fiber plan that he's starting to build out year after year, thanks to the support of the council. We also are making big upgrades on all of our intersections, so making sure that they can be remotely updated, making sure that they all have cameras so that we can identify when there are issues at those intersections. I don't know if, Steve, you want to talk about some of the infrastructure upgrades on the buses and vehicles. So we are starting to think about this. We just launched Hub Nashville, which is our area where you can report as a constituent issues that you're having throughout the community. So we're making progress on that side as well.
The one thing I'd highlight to disagree somewhat with the take is, here's one piece of technological architecture that may not be familiar to folks in the tech community, but credit to Nancy and folks having worked in other regions. One of the things that gives Nashville a leg up is the metropolitan form of government. Because frankly, what this mayor's trying to do, and in concert, one of the things to keep in mind, so I've heard, as the mayor's gone on the stump for this, or folks like Erin or myself, well, where's the regional plan? Well, this is part of a regional plan. Erin alluded to the in-motion process earlier that was done. And what the Improve Act did was go county by county and say certain counties, 6 out of the 10 counties in our region, can adopt these things. Apart from the international community, which is watching Nashville very closely, are the other counties. Because there are, essentially, this is a central piece of a broader regional plan. A big chunk, I mentioned the Murfreesboro Road project earlier that we're doing in partnership with Metro Public Works, Metro IT, TDOT, is laying cable. I mean, that's a huge chunk of the financial commitment in that process. To be able to do high-speed fiber optic cable through that corridor means that as those advances happen in technology, many of which we haven't heard of yet, we will be better able in that corridor and eventually in all of those corridors to be able to take advantage of that. So the one highlight I'd put in the corridor-based projects in the mayor's plan, light rail certainly, the rapid bus as well, is the investments and upgrades in technology and right-of-way infrastructure, that will enable future leaps in that deployment, as we move forward. Because we can't predict today what might be available in 20 years, maybe not even in 2 years. And I think what's exciting to me about it is the number of contacts I know you get, we get, Public Public Works gets from innovators literally around the world in this space to see what can be done, even things as simple as a bus. So next fall, this coming fall, actually, God, it's coming up quick, we'll be hosting the international meeting of the American Public Transportation Association. And we are getting accelerated deployment of technology on our next order of buses, not because they love me so much, but because they want to show it off to about 2,500 people from around the world that can look at it in a real application in Nashville. So it never moves as quickly as we want, but it is moving, you know, and I think there's a lot of leadership really pushing it forward.
Other questions? Alex up front here, you get, and one over here.
Yeah, there's a lot to like about this plan, but I think there's two reasons why it may not pass. Is that enough people don't see how they're going to be able to take advantage of it because they live in a neighborhood. It's hard to get to the road. It's running 17 regional transit stops, and I know you're reaching out better than you were in the original version of the plan to get people to the transit system more rapidly. But the other major reason is I don't think people see this as being able to reduce congestion in a significant way. We have to cut the number of cars on the road by 30%, 40% to reduce congestion given the road. And your ridership forecasts aren't that high. And they're not that high because you're being somewhat realistic, probably being a little higher than reality. But you had a better plan to reach into the neighborhoods, to get people to the bus stop in a matter of a few minutes without getting hot, sweaty, cold, frozen, dark at night, whatever, beat muddy, run over by a car because there's no sidewalk. People would use it. So why aren't you putting more of the money behind this plan? I think there's plenty there. Why don't you increase it? Why don't you put more of the money into the plan into how to get people to the transit system instead of digging up roads and even digging tunnels? I'm not even sure we can dig a tunnel. If we can't get people to the transit system, why do we have to dig up these really expensive things? Let's get people to the system, buy more buses, buy some more buses, have more routes, 10 times more bus route, at least 3 times more buses, get the ridership up at least 3 or 4 times, and use smaller buses so it doesn't increase the
So your question is, what can be done to enhance this plan specifically to the neighborhoods? And you brought up an interesting, and reduce congestion, but you bring up an interesting point about sidewalks, and as I understand the plan, a substantial investment is being made in sidewalks. Do you guys want to speak to that?
Yeah, so actually I'll talk a little bit about the corridor. So first of all, and I think Council Lady VanReece talked about this too. We have to start somewhere, and these lines don't go as far as we would like them to go, but they are a start. And the program is also a surcharge for 50 years, and so this is the program that we've identified for the first 15. There's going to be an opportunity for us to come back together after 15 years and figure out how to extend them to the county lines. And as our surrounding counties are doing referendums of their own, you know, whoever goes first, that's an opportunity for us to talk with them about extending it into the counties. Just on Tuesday, we released the Transit Improvement Plan, which was the document that we were required to create as part of the Improve Act, has to be signed off by a third-party auditor and by the state comptroller. And in that document, there are corridor profiles for all of the high-capacity corridors. And one thing that I think is important, we think of ourselves as a big county. We are a big county. But this plan actually means that 76% of all Nashville residents will be within half a mile, which means they're walking distance from a transit line. And 89% of all jobs in the county will be within a half mile. If you look at those corridors, it also shows you the percentage of people who live along those corridors that are going to be within a half mile of the transit lines. And that's also one of the biggest drivers of ridership, is that they're going to be close by.
Sorry, a half mile is a tenth of a mile.
Okay. Well, we you know, I think that we've seen in other cities that people are willing to walk a half mile, and actually it's residents that are willing to walk a half mile from their home to the transit stop. You do want jobs to be around a quarter mile from folks. And one of the benefits of transit, I think your point about that people don't see how it's going to benefit them, transit investments are actually something that impact and positively benefit the entire community. Council Lady VanReece talked about the commercial redevelopment that happens along these corridors. If you live in a transit-oriented community, I think you walk 10 times more than than you do if you're in a car-oriented community, which means that you are, we have a high obesity rate in Tennessee, and so that is a positive benefit from people walking more. I had a couple other points to say, but I think Steve will definitely add on.
You say that in a threatening sort of fashion. The other thing I would come back to in one of Erin's early slides is, let's go back to the Nashville next slide, which is where a lot of this for the Nashville piece really originated. And that said essentially to the Nashville community, look, we're going to grow, and we're going to grow pretty fast, and we're going to grow by a lot. How do you want to do that? Do we want to chew up farmland and forest in Jolton, or do we want to build up density? And it's a chicken and the egg kind of thing. While mass transit, leaving aside a lot of the rideshare, the things that Lyft's doing that are really exciting, isn't going to work really well without a high level of density. But how do you have a high level of density without the mass transit to support it? And we're seeing actually some of that pushback in the Charlotte corridor now with the density building up and the lack of capacity. So this plan anticipates that as this becomes formal, you will see that density grow in those key corridors. So a key piece of the congestion relief equation is not just that more people will be living within that quarter mile, within that tenth of a mile to get to these facilities, but frankly, they're going to be able to walk to a whole lot more places, because mass transit can be a very efficient way to travel. It's not as efficient as a pair of shoes. So the extent to which we can build out pedestrian facilities, better crossings, that density supports more services, whether it be grocery stores or restaurants or barbershops, for me to be able to walk where I get to. The ideal thing, in a perfect world, is I can walk to a whole bunch of places. If I got to get a little bit further, I can do a rideshare type of application like a Lyft. And then if I'm going to go into the downtown core, I can get on that faster, more reliable, and that's the key, is reliability, is that travel time is predictable. Nobody will argue that the Music City Star is the fastest thing you can ride between Lebanon and Nashville. But if you want to see some really cruel, happy people, watch people get off the Star in the morning when there's been an accident on I-40, because they know that they just cut their travel time in half and their neighbors are still stuck on the road. So it is kind of that chicken and egg equation of saying, if you were able to magically drop this on Nashville today, it doesn't have the density to support it. But where we now kind of and talking to a lot of folks, where we now kind of have that artificial limit of, well, the buildings downtown aren't going to get more than 30 or 40 stories tall. The value of that land is getting to a point where it will support much denser development. The same thing's going on. I know Nancy and I have this conversation in the corridors that we're talking about. We had, from the RTA perspective, when we issued a solicitation for development interest around Donaldson Station for potential change in use at that station, there was a lot of developer interest in mixed-use development and more dense development. So that's a piece of it. It's not all about how do we build a system out to get to where everybody is. It's about how do we reimagine the form of our city to make our land use more efficient as well.
If the voters are going to make a difference, and they live in the suburban homes, in a half-acre, quarter-acre, whatever, they're not living in the new developments you're talking about. The developers are very happy about the plan because they can buy the land cheap and have it for in the future. But we've got to make it work for the people where they live now. And they're going to continue to live. There's all the new people that live in these buildings along the hills, not the current residents.
So one other thing I just wanted to add to Steve is that while we do have some lower density along the corridors, the development that's happening in downtown today alone justifies a system like this, the day that it opens. What he also talked about is that the other bill that passed the same week of the Improve Act is the Transit-Oriented Redevelopment Act, which will allow us to do transit-oriented districts along all of these corridors. We're starting our first one in Donaldson around the Music City Star Station. And that will actually allow us to, it's called tax increment financing, where we can take some of the revenue of the increasing property values and invest it back into the corridor, like into a transit center. We can also require that a third of that TIF financing goes to affordable housing, which is not a tool that we have anywhere else in the county. One other thing I wanted to say, and Council Lady VanReece talked about this a little bit, is some of our changing demographics. So we learned some of these stats when we were doing the Nashville Next plan that are pretty shocking. So if we look at our community as we go out to 2040, by 2040, 81% of Davidson County residents won't have children. And you know, getting to work on time, getting your kids to school on time is one of the biggest inhibitors of being able to ride transit. And then the other really surprising statistic is that if you look at what we call peak home buyers, so probably the people that you're referring to that live in a much more suburban-like house that has a backyard, has a multi-car garage, in the 60s and 70s, that was 75% of our home buyers. As we move towards 2040, that becomes right around 30 to 32% of our home buyers, and the category of sort of the first-time home buyers and the downsizers, which tend to be buying in the Germantown, sort of and downtown, and so they're in more transit-friendly communities, walkable communities, both of them become 30% each. So 60% total of our home buyers. So we actually don't need some of those suburban residents to ride the system for it to be successful, but we think it absolutely will benefit them because it'll be taking people off the road, and they may want their teenager to use it, their spouse may decide to use it, they may use it to come downtown for a Titans game or a Predators game, so they may not be using it for their everyday commute, but they'll be using it in other ways.
Or a soccer game. I appreciate the question because a lot of people have the same question, and the opportunity to address it is extremely important. I represent a lot of those neighborhoods with quarter-acre, half-acre, 2-acre lots. And one of the things this does is protect those suburban neighborhoods. It allows neighborhoods like that to continue to thrive without being subdivided into talls and skinnies, without being able to make sure that grandma's brick ranch house continues to be part of the estate moving forward. Those neighborhoods absolutely must be protected. The encouraging thing is that any new homes that simply must, I don't know how many homes shy are we now, 4,000 houses that we could put people in right now if we had them, those need to be on these transit corridors in order to protect those neighborhoods. I think that also whenever you have those suburban neighborhoods being served by restaurant, retail, jobs, opportunities, then it continues to benefit that. So you're right in making sure that that question is addressed. And again, I call upon storytellers in the room to continue to describe the difference in making sure that we don't do an either or, but we continue to do as many different housing types as possible. So that those suburban neighborhoods do not become rental properties, but home ownership continues in those areas.
Quickly before we move on to the next question, Corey, you want to add on to that real quick?
Yeah, just very quickly. I mean, it sounds like one of your concerns is how people who don't live right on or along the transit line are going to take advantage of the system, and that is the ideal use case for the kind of first mile, last mile partnerships that we've been talking about. If we can find a way to connect them conveniently and affordably to those transit stops, they're much more likely to use them. So there should be a lot of opportunity there going forward.
Thank you. All right, other questions? Okay, hey, you already got a mic. Sorry.
I suspect adoption, recency, frequency of use is a driver for many of us in this room in our daily lives. I guess I'm curious about what the private sector, what the business community here can be doing to drive that adoption now and with the proposed plan. Is it transit screens in the offices? Is it Lyft codes that reduce parking strain? Curious.
So we are actually in the process of creating a travel demand management program. We got a grant from TDOT as part of their CMAQ program, which is their congestion mitigation and air quality program. And so we just hired our program coordinator in the last month, and there will be 2 more folks coming on board, which if any of you know our planning department, we are taking our transportation planning from our staff from 1.5 to 6.5 in 1 year with this program, plus some investments that were supported by the council, which is super, super exciting. So travel demand management is sort of exactly what you're talking about, and it encourages employers to rethink of the incentives that they're providing to their employees. So a lot of downtown employees do provide free parking, but don't pay for bus passes. So becoming participants in the Easy Ride program, providing B-Cycle memberships to their employees, bike parking, places to shower, talking about staggered work times, which is something that Bridgestone Americas is doing as part of their relocation downtown, encouraging telecommuting once or twice a week. But I think we will be thinking super creatively. I mean, there's a lot of cities that are doing this really well. Seattle is one of the best, and they have a countywide ordinance that actually requires employers of certain sizes to it's mandated that they create a travel demand management program for their employees. So you have to both increase the supply as well as address the demand, and I think there's a lot of room for us to make progress immediately in Nashville in that regard.
Just to highlight a couple things there and set a couple quick shameless plugs. If you are an employer and you can give flex hours telecommute, the easiest way to reduce congestion is really twofold. Number one, make your kid ride the school bus. Don't drive them to school. And number two, don't get on the road when it's too busy. But as an employer, if you can offer telecommute or flex hour solutions, and please consider the Easy Ride program of subsidizing bus pass. Just to highlight, it's remarkable to me, and I don't mean to embarrass anyone, because the business community has been very involved and very supportive of this effort. But when, I guess Alex was asking the question earlier about who rode the bus. So we would typically ask that question with corporate executives, and you don't expect a whole lot of corporate CEOs to say, yeah, I rode the bus to work today, although we were a couple. But then when you say, well, who offers free parking to their employees, and almost all the hands up in the room go up, okay, who offers free transit passes to their employees? And very few hands went up, and in some cases that's because they knew they didn't, and in other cases they're like, I have no idea whether we do or we don't. So if you are an employer, would consider it, even if only 2 or 3 of your employees make use of it. First of all, it's a great benefit for them, and if you want to talk to the person who should be the poster for this, it's a lady on my board, Hannah Paramore-Breen, who runs Paramore Digital. She went in kicking and screaming into it. Now half of her staff uses the bus, and they are happy as a clam about it. And I can set you up, by the way, if you want to talk to me after.
So I think my question probably goes best to you. As I'm thinking about this, I'm not really thinking about me, because I would be willing to walk that half mile to be able to make this go, but I'm thinking about my 77-year-old parents who probably couldn't make it to a bus stop straight in front of their house today. And so I'm interested in, does Lyft already have programs here or elsewhere where instead of it being a per ride, it's a monthly pass, or something that could just be, this is how you get, whether it's a 1/10 of a mile, a 1/4 of a mile, a half a mile, because there are some people who just physically aren't capable of getting any of that distance. What I'm interested in learning more about what that looks like and what these partnerships between the public-private partnerships look like.
Yeah, it's a hugely important question, and it's a hugely important use case. My father about 1.5 years ago had a couple of seizures. He was fine, but he couldn't drive for about 6 months. And, otherwise being in good health, he lives in suburban New Jersey. I mean, there's not really good ways to get around, but he was able to use Lyft, and he was able to have all of his mobility needs met. So providing those kind of services are unbelievably important. As far as subscription plans go, we are experimenting with those in a few places. The real challenge for that tends to be scale, and to make sure that it's the kind of thing where a subscription is going to be utilized enough by enough people that it makes sense to do so. But this is one of the things that makes autonomous vehicles so appealing. And as people give up their cars, you know that you can move much more to that mobility as a subscription, mobility as a service plan, so that if you're somebody like me who uses transit every single day but might need up to 2 rides per day in a Lyft, I can choose a plan that works for that. If you're somebody who really only needs it 6 times a year, you can choose that plan as well. But that's really a function of critical mass and adoption to get to that point.
The Senior Ride Program, you can Google it, Senior Ride Program. It's just been launched here in Nashville and started in the Green Hills area and is going to expand now into the Madison area, so I'm familiar with it. The good folks who started the Transit Alliance in Middle Tennessee have been involved with it, and Ed Cole's been involved with the Senior Ride Program. And it will specifically, its mission and its focus as it relates to even with the 50 Forward program and its members is to be able to provide this first mile, last mile ride to the doctors, ride to the library, ride to see my son's basketball game, whatever it is, right? To have vehicles that are specifically ones that will address any disability issues. You don't want to call for a car and it's like these bucket seats and hard to get in and out of. So all those particular issues in regard to how you're picked up, the sensitivity training that takes place for the drivers, all of it is specifically focused to seniors riding that mile, that first and last mile. So look it up, Senior Ride. It's going to be something that's a specific piece of this puzzle.
Yeah, and if I could just touch on that as well, because I love the question, because I think it ties to the gentleman's question earlier about, well, why should I vote for this if I can't use it? We hear from a lot of people, look, I'm never going to ride light rail, I'm never going to use this, but I have a 77-year-old mother, or I have a developmentally challenged son, or what have you. And part of the provision in this, Nancy touched on Senior Ride Nashville. Part of the issue with the partnerships with groups like Lyft is freeing up, basically having entities like Lyft be able to handle more of our ambulatory capacity. This also calls for an expansion of the Access Ride program. We're currently the largest door-to-door transportation system in Tennessee. We have about 100 Lyft-equipped vehicles. We need to expand that fleet. It would happen under this program. Types of partnerships with entities like Lyft, if we were able to partner to handle more of the ambulatory passenger demand, then that frees up wheelchair accessible capacity with what I'll call higher level of care. And then again, in connected payment systems. So one of the things with an account-based payment system, I've talked to people as far away as Oregon saying, well, I've got a mother in care in Nashville. Is there a way that I can load value onto her card to be able to make use of this? As well as with some of that technology, so we have the real time, the stuff that we're working on with Abhishek on our fixed route system, advancing it over to Access Ride. So in theory, if you say, okay, I'm going to go to work today, but I've got a mother in daycare, that I can actually see, okay, I see that the vehicle picked her up, she's on the vehicle, she's moving around, she's been dropped at the center. So to give people that peace of mind. So those are some of the enhancements. Would they happen without yeah, probably, eventually. But how much more quickly? To Nancy's point, I'm most excited about the stuff we can get done in the next 3 to 5 years out of this program.
Yeah, and I'd like to just very briefly touch on the ambulatory care, because it's such an important service we can provide. We actually have a partnership up in Boston now with their program called The Ride. It was a fairly typical paratransit system where you could call ahead, schedule a ride in one direction with 24 hours in advance. We partner with them to provide those services, and so now instead of being 24 hours in advance, it's on demand, and it costs about a third the price that it did before to operate. And so this is really a win-win for the transit agency, for us, and for, most importantly, the patient.
Those are wheelchair accessible?
There's a wheelchair accessible component to them. This is largely just for standard paratransit.
Yes.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that I'm totally on board with the comprehensive transit plan. But my question is more about the implementation and some of the assumptions being made. As an engineer, I know that the devil's in the details. And so I've heard a lot of comparisons made to Seattle and San Francisco, but these cities are very different than Nashville. They've long had established populations living in the urban center for decades, whereas Nashville has not. It's more of a recent trend. And they're also very culturally different than Nashville. I moved here from San Diego, spent a lot of time in San Francisco and Seattle, and riding the bus is like a very normal thing. But here in Nashville, I'm from here originally, so I know the perception here in Nashville from a lot of people is that, frankly, that bus riding is beneath them, and that I don't do that. And yeah, more people are moving here, and that's changing. So I'm a little concerned that we're looking at these cities as roadmaps, but they're not necessarily good roadmaps for Nashville. I've also lived in Phoenix and San Diego, which have buses and have light rail, and when you ride them, they're empty. Phoenix in particular has ones along the major corridors, but most people are not close enough to ride it, and it comes under a lot of criticism for its cost, because they built it, but they didn't build enough of it. And so it doesn't serve enough people. And in San Diego has a huge young person population, much bigger population than here in Nashville, and yet no one rides light rail, and very few people ride the bus. So I guess what I'm asking is, what is the, as a startup founder, I talk to a lot of investors, and the question I always get is, okay, let's say you build your product, what is your go-to-market strategy, or what is your market development? How do you actually get it in the hands of your customers? So what I'm asking is, what is your market development strategy? What is your advertising strategy? I mean, I know the Tennessee Lotto has done a pretty good job in advertising themselves, but how do you actually like change public perception and get the word out there and actually get people on board?
I'm trying to figure out where to start with that question. I mean, I think that one of the we are looking at a lot of our sort of peer cities, and the companies that we compete with the most for jobs and companies that are moving here are usually sort of Austin, Denver, Seattle, Minneapolis, Charlotte, Raleigh. All of those cities are investing in light rail systems except for Austin. Austin has decided to do sort of more of a bus-based system. You know, we've looked at our ridership projections for these corridors, and we have competitive sort of ridership per mile, which is the way you do sort of an apples to apples comparison to a lot of the cities that you named, better actually than Seattle and Charlotte, and that will mean that we're sort of competitive for federal grant funding in the future, but it's also the best way to do sort of an apples to apples comparison. I also don't totally think, I don't agree with the, you know, we have a car culture and these other places don't. I think those places just have better transit service. You know, the mayor, I think, said on Tuesday, you might think you won't ride our system, but if you're stuck in traffic and the train or bus is passing you and getting to its destination faster, you might decide to change your mind. And we're seeing that sort of across the country, that if you can offer competitive service, if it's convenient, if it's fast, if it's safe, you know, people will choose to ride it.
The other thing I would say about it is, because of the situation Nashville's in now. In fact, I actually got this question when I interviewed for this job, and they offered me the job anyway. How are you going to convince Nashvillians to ride mass transit? And I said, well, if you're talking about a 50-year-old native-born Nashvillian who's lived in Green Hills their entire life, you're not. But if you focus, you know, it's like don't pick the apple out of the barrel, pick it off the tree. So a lot of the focus is, frankly, through employers such as yourselves, well, as we're relocating people from cities that have robust transit, or directly in our case, the partnerships we've formed with Metro Nashville Public Schools with the STRIDE program. So basically, every public high school student in Nashville can ride transit for free. And we know from use patterns, and they can ride it all the time. It's just not riding it to and from school. First year we did it, we had tremendous use, as you would expect, going to school. Then school lets out for summer, and the ridership dropped, but not very significantly. So kids in Metro Nashville high schools now, whether they be charter schools, public schools, what have you, have exposure to that system, learn it. Because let's face it, if you haven't ridden it before, which most people who are native to Nashville have not, you got to decode the system a little bit. So starting that from scratch. But the idea of how are we magically going to convert everyone in the city to be a mass transit user, I think is probably an unrealistic goal. The other piece I would highlight, and Erin touched on it in the plan, is real focus on the frequent transit network. So we have to meet coverage goals. We have to cover a sufficient part of the county. But there are corridors, and those 10 corridors that Erin highlighted currently carry about 2/3 of our total ridership out of about 46 different routes. So the extent to which you can build up speed, frequency, span, and reliability creates a product that people are willing to use. And again, to Erin's point and the mayor's point, when you're sitting on that street or that highway every day and you keep watching this thing go by, eventually you're going to look at the website or you're going to call the phone number and say, where the hell's that thing going? And might I possibly be able to use it? If not for every trip, maybe to go to work, maybe to go to a soccer game, but what can I use it for?
We have about 11 more minutes. Other questions?
Great. Thanks very much, everybody. Lyft and your other partners are a little bit famous for not liking regulation, but you're talking a lot about much closer partnerships. I heard a little bit about subsidy transfer, that money would be going from the transit authorities to the private sector. And great, I look forward to all those advances. Can you talk a little bit about how open you're going to be to sharing your data and to sharing all that knowledge you have about transit, fares, times of day, origin, destination, and all that stuff you're going to know about your customers? Are you going to be sharing that data when you start receiving the public subsidy? And then perhaps I might move over to ask Tommy about HIPAA and questions about revealing personal data in that way. Because transit planning is very important. And for transit planning, we want that data.
I've heard that one before. Yeah, so I'll first address the primary issue. Data is incredibly sensitive, and it is a significant privacy and competitive concern. There are obviously a lot of good things and good use cases that a lot of people could do with things like origin destination data. There's also a lot of scary stuff that can be done if it falls into the wrong hands, and anytime that is shared with a government entity, as long as there is something like an Open Public Records Act, anybody can request that data. There was a study by MIT a couple years ago called Alone in the Crowd that basically said that as long as you have 3 unique data points showing like where 4259326X is going and coming from, that can be reverse engineered to determine the exact identity of who that person is, where they're going, what they may be doing at those times. And so a free exchange of data is something that is really not, wow, that just got really quiet without the air conditioning, is something that has to be done very sensitively. That said, we are very interested in finding ways that we can solve the problems together. A lot of the time that isn't just about coming up, it isn't just about a direct exchange of data. It's about trying to determine exactly what the issue is and how can we solve that without putting our customers' information at risk. And frequently we're able to do that. Once it actually hammers down to what is the issue that we're trying to solve, those are conversations that can often be had. And especially within the confines of a subsidized partnership, yeah, we are able to generally exchange limited data sets as far as within the confines of that partnership. And so there's a lot that we can do to work together here to solve the problems, even beyond the scope of things that, might let who your neighbor is having an affair with.
HIPAA, for those of you that don't know, I assume everybody does, but it's federal regulation that covers security and privacy and exchange of information in healthcare. And, there are a number of mechanisms in place today, like business associate agreements that will protect patients and providers for the exchange of that type of information. And I think we can all agree that there is some incentive to move ahead in this direction. For example, my mother-in-law, when she went to dialysis, she had to be taken in an ambulance every week. which that is just ultra expensive. Whereas now Lyft and Uber are partnering with providers and ambulance companies to provide those services on the front end and the back end to take hundreds of millions, billions of dollars out of the U.S. healthcare system. So there are opportunities for that to happen. And many of these things, under the right payer structure, like Medicaid, they're reimbursable events. So they'll be reimbursed. But it's much better for you and me as taxpayers for that to be a $6 ride as opposed to a $600 ride or a $6,000 ride. So yeah, I think it's you obviously have to protect the data, and there has to be mechanisms in place to ensure privacy and security and all of that. But it can be worked out with the proper audits and the proper business associate agreements and those types of things.
I've got two sort of related questions. So first question is there has it even been rolled around in the idea that in the future we don't allow cars in the downtown area at all and we swap it out for only public transportation? And the other question I had is, can you touch on the point of the 20% excise tax and exactly who that would hit and how far it reaches out?
Nancy, do you want to take the no cars in the downtown?
District 17 issue. We already have special events where there's no cars down there, and usually everyone has a really good time when that happens, unless you're a musician or if you're delivering beer. And so I think that there's still going to, because of the narrow streets, there's always going to be issues in regard to delivery and how to get in and out of that, those 6 blocks. And I don't think that it's going to be like a Beale Street issue in Memphis where it's permanently closed down and then reopened. And then I think that it's always going to be an entertainment district. And so when there's entertainment happening, you're going to see opportunities for us to be able to do that. And I think that part of the goal is with the tunnel is to be able to have less cars need to be down there. You talk about behavioral changes. I don't know how many of you guys want to go do something downtown and you realize just the traffic and the cost of parking, if you can find it, let's just call Lyft, right? Some of that behavioral changes, that's a trend of what we're talking about. It's like when it just becomes way more convenient to do it differently, you're going to do it differently. So I think that you're going to see less traffic simply because it's annoying to be in one of those cars. But there's no specific plan that I know of it permanently happening that way.
All right, 20% tax component of the question.
Well, I think I'll just add on to that. Since I'm the policy person in the room and not the elected official, I can talk about congestion pricing, I guess. So obviously that is a policy tool that cities are considering all over the world. There isn't a U.S. city that has been able to implement it, but I know New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles have tried, and it didn't work out the first time, and they're coming back around and they're starting to consider it again. I know we have a local professor who talks about it a lot as well, but I think one of the most important things to know is that congestion pricing is most effective and doesn't harm the economy if you have an alternative to driving. And so we need to invest in our alternatives first. Potentially congestion pricing is a policy tool that will become politically viable in Nashville, Tennessee after many of our other peer cities have done it first. But it's not something that I think is on the table right now because there are very few alternatives to driving. The business and excise tax, I have to admit, again, this was one of our surcharges that was available to us from the Improve Act. It is a very complicated tax, and so it's based on the size of your business. It's throughout Davidson County, so that was one of your questions where it's impacted, and it's based on your size, and then it's a percentage charge of your revenue. So I have the table that I could send to you that has sort of the breakdown of the different business classes and the revenue sources and what the impact is. The easy way to if you're already paying the business and excise tax. So if you're paying $1,000 today under this surcharge, you would be paying an additional $200 a year. But it's a little complicated as to how it would impact each business.
I think we are at time. Sorry we didn't get to everybody's question, but one thing that I wanted to highlight in closing, and I'm probably speaking to the choir since you've given us your morning to be here to learn more about this, what Councilwoman VanReece said is maybe the most important takeaway. Please go vote. Whatever your opinion is on this issue, talk to your friends and family members and register those opinions in the electoral process. Please go vote and participate in this referendum. And with that, let's give our panelists a round of applause.
And one more round of applause for the moderator, Dan Hogan. Thanks so much for running this. Two more things really quickly. First, thank you so much for coming today. Really appreciate the discussion. Please keep engaged. One of the ways you can do that is over in the back corner if you are interested in signing the petition to get engaged and show your support for the transit program. Transit for Nashville is back there signing up people. They apparently are recently launching an app for this, so if you want to keep engaged and keep up to date, you can download that app. Go talk to both Robin and Meredith. They can tell you more details at the backs of the room. And finally, lastly, got some news that while we were in the room, it sounds like the MLS commissioner is coming tomorrow with potentially some exciting news. So we may have even more reason for traffic. So maybe across the street. So thank you.
Plug on his car? Like, what are we
Right. We're connected. Anyways, thank you everybody so much for coming and appreciate it, and take care. Happy holidays. Nice job.
That was
well done.
well organized.
Good job.
Good job.
Let's stay in touch.
Yes. Yeah. To the extent you want me involved, I'm happy to help or whatever.
I will actually
Okay.
There are a number of things that we should talk about.
Super. Thank you. Good to reconnect with you.